Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Patrick, our moderator.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you all for joining us today on our webinar, Demystifying the Public-Private Partnership Relationship. My name is Patrick McCartney. I am the Executive Director of the International Essential Tremor Foundation. The IETF, as most people know us by, we are the patient advocacy group for the essential tremor community. Essential tremor being the most common movement disorder in the world, being 8 times more prevalent than Parkinson's. Our organization focuses on 4 main areas for essential tremor: awareness, education, support, and research. I'm also a member of the American Brain Coalition Board and ABC's Program Committee Chair. So during this next hour, I'm going to have a conversation with 2 leaders who are mastering the public-private partnership relationship and are going to shed some light on how these partnerships can advance research and cures for brain diseases and disorders. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First is Dr. Donald Lowe. He is the Director of Therapeutic Development Branch at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATs, which is much easier to say. And Louise Vetter is President and CEO of the Huntington Disease Society of America, or HDSA, a nonprofit member of the American Brain Coalition. And Louise is also a former ABC board member and treasurer. So before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you all are on the listen-only mode and your mics are muted. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to provide those throughout the next hour in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to your questions at the end, about the last 15 minutes of our time together today. So a little bit about ABC. ABC's focus on the public-private partnership grows out of our Innovation Initiative. It's a collaborative program intended to stimulate private investment in brain-related research and strengthen the research and development enterprise to expedite the translation of neuroscience research into life-changing therapies and cures. Public-private partnerships can help both industry and patient advocacy organizations build translational research and development capacity to address even the most challenging central nervous system conditions. It's our hope the brain-focused nonprofits of any size will leave this webinar with a better understanding of how these public-private partnerships can advance your missions and speed the development of more effective treatments for brain diseases and disorders. With that, let's jump right into our conversation. Don and Louise, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, pleasure.
So can you guys tell us a little bit about your organizations and your mission? Louise, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick, and thanks to the American Brain Coalition for hosting today's conversation. Don and I go way back, so I'm thrilled that I get to have a conversation with all of you. So Huntington's disease is a rare neurological disease. It affects about 40,000 Americans symptomatically, and it's often described as being the devil of all brain diseases because of the way it affects motor, mood, and cognition. So it really is a total brain deterioration over a span of 10 to 20 years. It is caused by a genetic mutation, a dominant genetic mutation. So if one of your parents has HD, you have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the gene that causes it. And back in 1967, folk singer Woody Guthrie was losing his battle with Huntington's disease. And his widow, Marjorie Guthrie, took it upon herself to make it her mission to bring together families affected by this rare and very misunderstood condition, and provide education, advocacy, and support clinical care and science to help HD families. So from her initial mailing list of 30 families, we now are a nationwide organization. And our mission at the Huntington's Disease Society of America is to improve the lives of everyone affected by Huntington's disease and their families, because our work is uniquely one that affects families generationally and is complex and completely devastating. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about how we, over the course of the last decade in particular, have learned to find different partners that come from all shapes and sizes, private and public, to help us do our mission. Let me turn it over to Don.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And likewise, thank you very much, Patrick and ABC for inviting me to be here on behalf of NCATs. And likewise, really delighted to be on the same panel with Louise, who I met maybe 10 or more years ago. I spent many years in the trenches, as it were, on the research side as well as the patient side for Huntington's disease. And indeed, it's the most challenging and struggling type of disease to battle as a patient and as a scientist and as an enterprise that wants to bring cures to patients. And sadder still is that Huntington's disease is one of maybe 7,000 or 10,000 diseases with known molecular causes, most of which are rare, most of which affect the brain, and only 500 of which have any kind of current treatments. And as an entire biomedical research ecosystem, we're only able to bring maybe 2 or 3 new drugs to FDA approval and to the clinic each year. So if you just do a little mental calculation, that's not going to work out. You know, we are nowhere near. It'll take hundreds of years to even make a dent in the 10,000 diseases that are out there. And so NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, it was formed about a decade ago, about 8 years ago, as the newest institute of the National Institutes of Health. And unlike all the other institutes, which are focused on a particular disease or organ, NCATS was set up to attack this very problem. You know, how is it that we are going to collectively find cures for 7,000-10,000 diseases, because we can't wait. And the central problem is that the system has all sorts of bottlenecks in it, you know, from the academic research side to the translational side, which is changing, transforming an academic finding or a hypothesis into a drug that can be tested in patients. And really, even after drugs are approved, you know, getting drugs to patients and understanding how to use those drugs in an optimal way. So there's so many bottlenecks along the way, and collectively these bottlenecks result in this insane failure rate of drug development. So we only approve 2 or 3 drugs per year, but not for want of trying. And so it's because the failure rate is something like literally something like 99% or more from the time that you first have the idea in a research lab to getting it approved by the FDA for clinical use. That failure rate, something like 99%. And that has to change. And so NCATS was formed to try to identify these common problems for all diseases, including rare diseases like Huntington's, and really especially for brain diseases, because they collectively make up the majority of diseases that are not adequately treated now. And so so that's our monumental task, and really central to that is not being smart by ourselves, but really forming partnerships. And that's with the research community, with the patient community, and with the private sector, because that's so essential in getting new drugs to market. So so I'm sorry I tend to go blah, blah, blah. So, but that's actually, if you can believe it, kind of a short version for what NCATS is about and what our mission is, and why we feel that PPPs are so central to the success of all drug development.
So Louise, how do public-private partnerships fit into HDSA's mission?
It's a great question, Patrick. And I think Don hinted to it a little bit. Our mission as a nonprofit, and I think generally in the public health sector, is so huge that it's hard to do it alone. And so we're a relatively small nonprofit, made smaller because of the COVID-19 crisis and the economic impact. And we have families that are fully depending on the Huntington's Disease Society of America to provide clinical care and hope. So it really is a help and hope expectation of our organization by families. And so to do that, we generously look for anyone and everyone who shares our commitment to supporting families affected by Huntington's disease and finding a way to create really unique and forward-leaning partnership projects so that we can do more. We can't do it alone. The fight against HD and honestly, the fight against any disease is much bigger than one group of people. So partnerships are a very strategic way for us to play to our strengths and increase our impact.
So Don, how does NCATs work with private entities to advance your mission?
Well, I definitely would echo exactly what Louise just said, and that's just essential, and really one of the mantras we have at NCATs. I don't know if it's really a mantra, but basically everything has to be done by teams, and we just have this conviction that if you're not working together as a team, the drug development goals you have can't possibly be successful. And that starts with researchers and patients, patient communities. And on the other end of it, if you think of that side as the genesis of the need, the identification of the need, the identification of what kind of drugs are needed, and the collaboration with the research community to develop new hypotheses and ideas about developing cures. If that's on the front end, on the back end really is the private sector, because ultimately the amount of literally the amount of money and infrastructure it takes to bring a drug into the clinic, to get FDA approval, to be able to manufacture it, distribute it, educate hospitals, and really put a new drug into clinical practice. Practically speaking, that job is done by the private sector. The vast majority of drugs have to be taken up by the private sector at some point. So that partnership isn't an option, isn't an added tool. That's central to the whole success of the development of new drugs. And in many ways, NCATs was designed to sit in the middle of that, in between that. There's, in the jargon of the drug development world, there's a phrase, term called the Valley of Death. And this is at the beginning of the Valley of Death is when you have this great idea that patients and researchers work together, have this new drug candidate. They think it's going to work. This one's going to really work. But it turns out that there's so much work left to be done between that idea and FDA approval that very few enterprises, very few universities have these skills. Very few small foundations or small companies have this kind of expertise, and hardly anyone has enough money to do it, because it's going to take another 3 or 5 years and $5 to $10 million to convert that original idea into a drug that can be manufactured, that can be demonstrated to be safe, and to pass the very stringent criteria for efficacy and safety that the FDA have. And so that is the Valley of Death, in that it's so hard to move your science across that valley, but it's also very hard to communicate with the private sector, to demonstrate or to convince the private sector that there is a viable business proposition at the end of it. Because at the end of it, it has to be an effective clinical product, but the commercial sector has to quite literally have to find that it's a reasonable business proposition. So the earlier that you can establish this kind of public-private partnership that extends through the whole research ecosystem, the better it will be for the potential success of that drug candidate.
So here's a question for both of you. What factors do you consider when you're evaluating a public-private partnership opportunity, and what do you look for in a partner?
Well, maybe I'll go first. So first and foremost, mission alignment. Everything starts and ends there. Does the partner have shared goals related to bringing perhaps an effective therapy to market, developing a new research initiative that can help move care and science forward? Does it fall under our very large, sort of messy umbrella of improving the lives of everyone affected with Huntington's disease? That is the first and most important question. Then we look at the sort of history with that partner. What do they know about us? How are they working with us? What perhaps is their familiarity and awareness in the space? What do families think of them? And what are they looking to bring to the table? So that, you know, I think we've all found ourselves in situations where someone says they want to be a partner, but they're not actually offering it forward. We really look at the sincerity of interest. To Don's point, certainly when a private partner is involved in a discussion, we're aware of the commercial interests that they have. But there's a way to balance that. And I think that's where the mission, the appreciation and understanding of the Huntington's disease community, for example, in our space, privacy and genetic discrimination are real issues. And so making sure that we have partners who truly understand some of those additional complexities. And so we kick the tires. We vet our partners, public and private, to make sure that it's a really good fit. And you know, you can really liken it to any purchase that you make, personal or business minded, you know, just in terms of, have you gotten a few bids? Do you know, is this a reliable product? Is this going to move you forward and accomplish what it needs to? And we really assess it from that business perspective. It is not about the money. And I think it's notable that in all that I've just been prattling on about for the last 3 minutes, money is a secondary and sometimes tertiary component of the decision making. We are not motivated by money as a nonprofit. We are motivated by the good that we do. So we look at that and we have to balance that as well. There are times, certainly, when partnerships can be meaningful from a revenue generation perspective. There could be an educational grant or a sponsorship that helps enable our ability to provide services. But first and foremost, it has to meet a mission objective within the organization.
Don, how about at NCATs? What are you guys looking for?
You know, I wish I could just steal all of what Louise just said. That's exactly right. It's as though we could trade our comments. You know, the mission alignment truly is central. And as Louise says, it's not about money. It's not about money for patients or for a foundation, and certainly not for the government. But it is, you can think of it as a kind of a return on investment, where the return isn't money, but it's a cure. It's a treatment for patients. It's making a dent in all these different diseases that don't have treatments currently. And but then on the private side, just from a practical standpoint, it's not necessarily about money, but there has to be enough money to support the activities that you require to get a new drug in the clinic. And that's a problem in that, for the most part, with very few exceptions, foundations in the United States are not quite large enough to maintain very large portfolios of drug development programs, because to get the industry number, so if you read an industry magazine, and you ask, how much does it cost to develop a new drug for any disease and put it into the marketplace, into the clinic? That's billions of dollars. And so for the most part, that's just unsustainable from a nonprofit sector point of view. And so although it's not about money, there has to be money someplace. And if you kind of think about it, because of the commercial system that we have in our medical system, it's not even necessarily about money per se, but it's about how much money are you willing to put at risk? You know, how much risk are you willing to undertake? So in large part, what NCATs was designed to be was, again, this kind of bridge, so that we, as a research program, we don't provide funding per se, but we provide direct collaboration with patients, researchers, foundations, to really bring new drug ideas into clinical testing. And so in that way, we don't provide money, but we provide the equivalent of money. We provide something, in a sense, better than money. It's what you really need, which is all the data and all the extra work and expertise you need to kind of put into shape a new drug idea for testing in patients. And in that way, you kind of skip the money part. And instead, what you wind up doing is that NCATs can absorb a lot of the risk. So instead of money, we absorb all the risk that you would otherwise have to put your money into. So whether you're a foundation or a company. And so that way it's this multi-way public-private partnership where we can reduce the risk and therefore reduce the amount of money it takes to get a new drug idea into clinic, so that in the end, everyone wins. That is, there's a better value proposition, a better business proposition to support the kind of mission alignment, or to enable the kind of mission alignment that Louise was talking about.
So Don, how do your partnerships usually start at NCATs? Is it you approaching the entity, or do they come to you guys looking for a partnership?
You know, it's a mixture. We have a typical kind of government website that's not very compelling, and it's hard to find us, and so but many people find us through just general knowledge about resources at the NIH. But a lot of what we do really is to just be out there in the community talking to people, and to raise awareness essentially on an individual basis, all the way down to the individual patient, really, because there are rare diseases now that literally may only have one patient or very few patients. So we can make press announcements, we can make websites, but what we really need to be is out there in the community talking to people. And the seed we like to plant is that maybe you're not ready now, or maybe you don't need NCATs now, but one of these days you may need us, or may need somebody like us, and you will know who to call. So I don't know if that's a very good answer, but it's just trying to be part of the community.
So Don, another question for you, and I think this is something our organization, I'm sure Louise's and several of our listeners would be interested in, is what roles do the patient advocacy organizations play in NCATS public-private partnerships?
Oh, well, I guess I can jump in first, since it's about NCATS. I would say it's absolutely essential. So in fact, while the group that I run is more biased towards the research itself and the regulatory challenges and the partnerships, we have an entire division at NCATS also that's literally focused entirely on interacting with patients. And so it's a combination of communication and providing resources to patients, but actually tools, providing clinical trial networks. It's really quite a broad program, and so we are very convinced that patients are an essential part. They kind of are the foundational part of all our drug development efforts, and so we really view it as I say, as foundational to all the work we do, particularly in the rare disease space. And again, most all rare diseases occur in the brain.
So Louise, what services or values does HDSA bring to its public-private partnerships?
First and foremost, we bring the families. And I think that's really important, that all patient advocacy organizations, your value in building a partnership is the knowledge that you have of the condition through your families. So it's what you're advocating for. It's the why of every single day. And that creates the inspiration and the rationale for a good partnership. And it's also what you bring to the table. As Don mentioned, nonprofit organizations don't usually bring money to the table, especially small ones focused on rare diseases. But what we do bring is credibility and engagement from families affected by the condition. And the engagement can mean everything from being aware of and participating in advisory boards and clinical research, to helping companies, private sector in particular, have a better understanding of the condition so that their journey through the regulatory and commercialization process can be more successful. We know that regulators are asking more in terms of patient perspective and patient insights to bring a drug to market, making sure that a compound actually meets a clinical need from a patient perspective and is born of indicators of success that are meaningful for families. Nobody wants to be spending money on medicines that don't actually help, the disease that they're marketed for, right? We don't want, expensive placebos or window dressing. We need things that make a difference. And so patient insights earlier into the drug development process are critical to that. So that's what we bring to our partnerships. And just to pick up a little bit on the money component, we build partnerships of all different shapes and sizes. Some of our partnerships are with other nonprofit organizations, some are with donors, and I think some donors and private foundations can really be classified as a private partnership. And then of course with industry, and I think the challenge at the end of every day is to make sure that the value that you're contributing is being multiplied forward in terms of the services that families are ultimately able to benefit from.
So another question for both of you. How do you guys manage industry relationships with the context of this public-private partnership? So I think you both have mentioned the money aspect of it, and I know there's that perception sometimes, that gray area of, are you selling out kind of thing. So how do you manage those perceptions, those expectations?
Well, I'll jump in.
Yeah. Actually, can I jump in? First, just to echo again that Louise's point of the critical role of patients and patients' families. Really, if I put my old scientist hat on, and especially working in Huntington's disease for many years, I would say we scientists are kind of earnestly good-hearted, but we can easily go off track. We can easily just fall in love with these really elegant scientific ideas and not be rooted really in what the patient needs. And so as Louise says, as early as the patient community can be involved in research, the better. I mean, from the very beginning of basic research all the way through the drug development process. The number of times when a new drug is brought into market for a rare disease, but the clinical trial doesn't really know what to look for, what patients actually care about, that is a sad reality that happens often, actually. So without patients, none of this is ever going to work. In terms of the pharma side, the private sector side, if you're talking about biotechnology, venture capitalists, pharmaceutical firms, they're all good people at heart just the same way. I mean, they have to abide by commercial realities, but they really want to help. And so as Louise says, it's really fundamentally not about the money, but understanding how to build the alignment in mission. And one of the big issues, one of the big stumbling blocks always is that a pharmaceutical firm or an investor or a biotech firm, their worldview is very dominated by the regulatory side, what FDA will require and what the markets will require. And practically speaking, what does a drug have to look like in the clinic to be really effective? And so it's its own world, it's its own lingo. It's a different one from the real, English language. It's different from academic language. And so getting that interface, sometimes there's alignment and you don't even know it. And so on both sides, on the private sector side, being better able to understand what patients and researchers are talking about, and vice versa, for patients and researchers to understand what does the pharmaceutical world need? What does the private sector actually need to see? Because they have, A, B, C, if you don't check off these check boxes, they don't think there's a product, there's not a practical product. If they don't think there's a practical product, there's no mission alignment. So this kind of communication is really fundamental and very challenging, actually. So we spend a lot of time trying to essentially mediate that kind of communication and that kind of alignment.
And to pick up on what Don was saying, I'm reminded by the title slide for this presentation and the first word being demystifying, because I think a lot of it comes down to that communication and the trust and just, sort of recognizing what every person around a table is bringing to a potential partnership and what they need to get from it. Nothing makes me happier than when a new company entering the HD space reaches out to us, because they may need to develop, or they need to develop a successful compound, right? That's why they're motivated. They think they have the science, they have the interest and the long-term vision for a therapeutic. I, as an advocate for the HD community, need them to be successful. Every single company that comes to HDSA with interest in learning about the HD community and potentially getting involved in therapeutic development, I'm going to be a resource to them, and the entire HDSA team and community is going to be, because we need them to be successful. We're rooting for each and every one of them to cross that valley of death and come out the other side, so that we blow the NCATs stats out of the water. And maybe overall it's a 99% approval rating, but maybe in the HD space it's 100%, right? Like I want to totally throw Don's model out of the water and make sure that everything that gets approved every year is for HD families. I'm a little bit selfish, I get it, that's right? And so when we go into partnerships, I go into it with that same mentality. I know what they're looking for. And you know, and I know what I'm looking for. So we go into that partnership saying, okay, we have our interests. How can we balance that? And so in addition to patient insights and understanding and a community that could potentially learn about clinical studies that they're running and sort of all of that awareness, what I can say to a private funder, and particularly an industry partner, is that by working with HDSA, we can reduce risk, right? Because we're going to help make sure that you have the information you need to make good decisions. That's important. We don't want them to be blindsided by something that perhaps they didn't consider. And we can also very often help with time. It takes a lot of money and resources for a company to develop a clinical study at any stage and then recruit for it. And by working with patients from the beginning, we can very often create a more efficient process through which all of that can happen. We have different patient engagement opportunities. We have different events and chapters and fundraisers where you know, we want all of our partners to come and get to know us, and that makes everything more efficient and effective.
Actually, can I jump in, because that is a wonderful outline and statement, and I'd like to kind of jump on that to kind of delve a little deeper into the failure rate, you know, because you know, usually when you bandy about this, you know, 90% failure rate, 99% failure rate, everyone assumes that means the science is really hard, that, you know, just somewhere around, you know, a new drug idea doesn't work out. But if you go around and, you know, you're hanging around in the biotech community and the pharma community, the conventional wisdom, and I think it's true, is that most new scientific drug ventures, so companies, you know, drug development ideas, new drug candidates, die of enterprise failure, not of science failure. Because something else happens that the company, let's say, didn't take into account, and that would be the risk, the time, the enrollment, what to look for. You know, all the various things we've talked about can derail a drug development program, because at some point the risk becomes too great for the money, and so it goes in there. And so again, going back to the first thing Louise said about alignment, that's something that the alignment achieves. That is, if we as a patient research early development community can really align, educate, and inform and demystify, right, what it will take to get a new drug for Huntington's disease or any one of the other 10,000 diseases. What will it take? What will it look like? Be ready for it, be prepared for it. And that's going to be not a single entity, but partnerships all up and down, all throughout the drug development process, to make sure there's always understanding, alignment. And if you do that, perhaps magically the failure rate will decrease. So just to brag a little bit, so even in the last 8 years that NCATs has been in existence, one of the areas we focus on the most is this valley of death. How do you take a new drug idea from academic research and turn it into a product that can be tested in the clinic and approved by the FDA for testing in patients? So that's the initial big valley of death. That failure rate is supposed to be 80, 90%, just that one segment. And this is anecdotal, but even in the 8 years we've been in existence, out of the 50 or so projects we've undertaken, our success rate is probably more like 70, 80% success. And so that's because we think that we are trying our best to demystify, to work with patients, researchers, public-private partnerships, and also be able to absorb this risk that we've been talking about. Because it's the government, we're not constantly at risk of going out of business with a downturn, you know, on the in the market. So we can be in there for the count. You know, we can stick with a project until it fails of science. And so in a way, we've been testing the idea, what if the only way you could fail was science? You weren't going to fail because of misalignment or lack of capitalization or lack of expertise. You weren't going to fail for enterprise failures. You're only going to fail for science failures. What's the failure rate? Maybe it's only 10 or 20 or 30%, which means Louise's conviction and goal might really come true. I mean, why not have every drug work out for HD? If you could demystify, form these partnerships, and try your best not to have any scientific ideas die of enterprise failure, but have the best chance for pure scientific and clinical success.
So we've talked a lot about concepts, philosophies. Let's talk about some real world situations. Can you guys share with our group here today some real world examples of how a successful public-private partnership that you've engaged in? Louise, let's start with, how about start with you?
Sure. Absolutely. It's sort of our bread and butter, as I alluded to. So there are lots of partnerships of different shapes and sizes at HDSA. So I'm going to sort of generally describe 3 different models that we have going on. So first, we have partnerships with private foundations who bring resources, but don't necessarily have the capacity to make something happen. So maybe it's funding science. And so we have a few examples of working with private foundations to support science that is reviewed by our scientific advisory board. And in some cases, the foundation ponies up the resources exclusively, and HDSA just brings the expertise. In other examples, we have situations where maybe 2/3 of the resources are provided by the private foundation, but HDSA has skin in the game as well, and we also contribute some to that partnership. So that's one example. Another example is we do receive funding, educational funding very often from industry partners to help bring resources to families. And I think very often, and I would, suffice it to say that probably most of us on this call receive those types of educational grants from a pharmaceutical or a biotech company. Those are partnerships. There are mutual expectations on both sides there. It's not just a transaction. And if a company comes to you and offers money for a project, don't be afraid to walk away because it should be a partnership, not just a revenue grab. And I think that's an important part of how at HDSA we've been successful, is that we are very specific and deliberate about the private partnerships that we have in that manner, because not all money is good money. Not all money should be spent on the things that people want to spend it on. And when we're working in a rare disease space with an urgent need, we want to make sure that every dollar goes as far as it can for the mission. So I would just encourage everyone to, again, look at those educational grants as partnerships. And then we also have a more complex partnership model that we've been successful at navigating and brokering, where we have an industry partner, a private foundation, sometimes a vendor, sometimes an academic medical institution, coming together for different clinical research or observational research type studies. So we have a few of those. One is called HD Legacy. It's a new partnership that HDSA has with the CHDI Foundation, which is a private foundation in the HD space specifically, and Harvard Brain Bank. And the idea here is that we need more tissue donation in the HD space to better understand the pathology of the disease, biomarker identification. There's just gobs and gobs that you can do, right, with more human experience of the disease. This is not something that we could do alone. It's not something that CHDI could do alone, and it's not something that the Harvard Brain Bank could do alone. So we have funding and sort of, operational support that's provided by CHDI. We have the Brain Bank and all of its network and expertise and academic oversight from Harvard Brain Bank. And then at HDSA, we have the family connections and the ability to help educate families on the importance of tissue donation as appropriate. And so that's one example. Now I will say that this particular partnership is stuck in IRB review. So, there's not a ton about it online yet, but that's, a very timely example of something we're working through. And, again, it's really meaningful to our mission.
Don, you have an example? Or actually, I've got another. We're kind of getting close to our timeline, but I think I got a better question. How, for the folks that are probably on this call too, how can brain-focused nonprofits like members of the ABC help NCATs advance its mission?
Well, I would love to flip it around, because it's the same mission really, and in a way, what we were set up to do was not to provide a new kind of model or a template on a quote better way, of getting across the valley of death, say. Rather, what we've built is almost like a Swiss Army knife of gigantic proportions, like 3,000 blades, of every sort. And so our starting point is a collaboration, a partnership that like HDSA may have put together, or a basic researcher or a biotech company, some kind of core and start of a drug development idea and plan to develop this drug candidate into something ready for clinical testing. Some of those are going great by themselves, but a lot of them will need some extra help. And as Louise has been saying, it's really not about money. And in fact, usually if you have a partial team, like almost the perfect partnership, giving that partnership money usually doesn't help, because it's usually not about money. It's about having the right partners and the right expertise. So basically our 3,000 blade Swiss Army knife is, what are you missing? Chances are we have the blade somewhere. And so every partnership for us, every collaboration for us is different, in that what's missing from the project is always different. And what we try to do is be ready to be prepared to bring to the project whatever is missing, whatever are the last pieces that are missing. And in fact, maybe I could kind of pivot to the question in the question box. So in terms of this question was getting technical on CRADAs and different kinds of agreements. So the answer to the question in the chat is that we generally try not to be an organization that works with the research and patient side, ready something else, and then partners to the commercial side. We'd like to have all those be a copacetic partnership from the very beginning. And so from the time that the project's born, if there already is a commercial component to that, so that there is the next step is already ready, they're already waiting for something, and in the partnership, you already know what they need, then that kind of partnership makes it so that we're part of a continuum of the process of drug development, rather than being a transactional step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So in our last about 10-15 minutes here, let's see if we have some questions from our viewers here today. I've only seen the one that you just covered there, Don. If Katie, do you have any, or I've got a couple more actually on my list if we don't have any out there. Oh, let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's a question for the group. If a patient advocacy organization is interested in learning more about or identifying a partner for a public-private partnership, where would you recommend they start their research? An opportunity to plug in. Where would they go to look for that kind of information?
So, I mean, I can jump in and say, you know, the first thing, if you've sort of surveyed your landscape and you don't see anything obvious, is to have a conversation with peers. And certainly the American Brain Coalition is a great place to start. So, you know, to be able to bounce things off of Katie, she can play a little bit of matchmaker sometimes, but then also participating in different ABC events. You have an opportunity to meet your peers, albeit virtually right now, and begin that networking process, learn from what others are doing, and very often, you know, potential partnerships come through that. And don't be afraid to participate in SFN events, or I know we're a National Health Council member. That's a coalition of national health organizations that's meaningful to us from an advocacy perspective. And it's just a great place to get ideas and see models that have been successful in other places that we then can seek to recreate in our own space.
You know, absolutely, and I would echo that and say that that in fact, recent successes especially in rare neurological diseases like HD, SMA have really kind of caught the attention of industry too. So in the past, if you attended, let's say, a patient-focused symposium on new drug ideas, on research and patient partnerships, you know, in the old days, you wouldn't see a lot of representatives from industry, but now you see a lot of them actually. And so it's not uncommon at all. So for example, we unfortunately only have the ability to do this once a year, but we have the NCATs Rare Disease Day. It's actually a couple days, and it's really focused on the patient community. But over the years, I can tell you, a quarter of the people that show up are from industry, because they really want to understand basically what the landscape is like, what the opportunities are for new commercial products, and they need to understand from the patient and research point of view what's going on. You know, what's ready, what's needed. So I would likewise, you know, encourage participation in those kinds of symposia and workshops and meetings. It's a great place.
So Louise, we got a question for you. The question is, do you consider yourself, HDA, not yourself, the public or the private or the public entity in the partnership, and does it depend on the partnership? Meaning, for instance, if you're working with NIH versus the industry, where with industry, you'd probably be the public entity, and NIH, you might be the private one.
So it's a great question. We're always public. As a 501c3 organization, and I serve at the pleasure of the community, and every dollar that we spend, you know, is because of the generosity that folks share towards our mission. We're always public. And that's consistent. The partnerships we've had with the NIH over the years, it's been public, and you know, I'd say we break the mold in that one, but we're always the public face.
Okay, so here's another question for both of you. Are public-private partnerships better suited for a certain size or nonprofit, or are there opportunities for any kind of CNS-focused organization?
I would say any size, really. You shouldn't be shy about it. In fact, one of the areas that NCATS is trying to help out in is the so-called N of 1 patients, you know, area. There's a really landmark achievement and publication last year of a drug developed for a single patient. That is just the way that you can have a birth defect, you know, on your skin, you know, mole or something. You can have a birth defect in your genome, And if that's the case, then it's not an inherited disease like Huntington's disease. Only you will ever have this disease. So what are the chances that you could put a public-private partnership together to develop a cure for a single patient? Doesn't that seem crazy? But it's possible, actually. So we and a bunch of companies, actually, and nonprofits and patient organizations are really trying to push the boundaries of that. So I'd like to say that there really shouldn't be a limit. There isn't a sweet spot. Any size, any shape, any form of public-private partnership is not only possible, but it's a really great way to move, to progress a new drug idea, drug candidate, even for very few patients, all the way down to one.
I would echo that completely. And one of my favorite images is a picture of a little orange cat with the shadow of a lion behind it. And I often like to think of HDSA in that way. We're, a small organization, but we overachieve in terms of our impact. And I think that when we go into partnerships, we approach it from the same perspective. So I would encourage everyone to have that confidence and see the value. And in many ways, smaller organizations have a lot more flexibility to innovate in partnerships than the larger organizations. We, at least at HDSA, it's hard to imagine a model. There's not one way that we do anything, right? We respond to the community needs and the donor needs and our partner needs in a way that is fluid and flexible at all times. And I think because of our size, we're able to do that. So I would encourage you to be small and mighty.
So one last question before we wrap up. What role does academia play in the public-private partnership space?
Don, I'm going to kick this one to you.
Not a good sign when they start laughing before they answer the question. Don, any thoughts? Did he freeze on us?
Did we lose him?
I think we might have lost him.
All right. I will say.
Oh, there he's back. Don, did you hear the question?
Did I frozen up?
Yeah, you froze there for a second.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think we'll always count on academia being the engine that drives new ideas about developing drugs, especially for rare diseases. Academia has been set up to have that freedom of thought and innovation and new ideas. It's an easy academic and patient and foundation interactions are very easy and very natural. So it's still, I think it's always going to be the go-to place for those new revolutionary ideas that will finally result in a great treatment for a disease, any disease. And so it's something that we need to keep and nurture. And in order for them to be successful in developing new drugs, that's the topic of the workshop today. Those private-public collaborations, partnerships then have to be formed to translate those into tractable new drug candidates for testing.
Great. Well, we're getting kind of backing up close to our hour time here. So I want to kind of wrap things up here. So on behalf of the American Brain Coalition Board of Directors and the Program Committee, I'd like to thank Don and Louise for engaging in this really important conversation with us today and sharing some great information. I'm also excited to announce that ABC has developed a new public-private partnership resource page to help nonprofits learn more about public-private partnerships and how these partnerships can spur drug development for brain disease and disorders. I encourage you to visit the page. You should see the link to that page is on your screen right now. Feel free to check those pages out and learn more about ABC's Innovation Initiative. Let's say that 5 times quick. So again, thank you all for attending today. Again, thank you, Louise and Don. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your input and I hope everyone has a great day and stay safe. Thank you again for joining.